I don't know. It's muffled and it still feels like there's a golf ball or something in there, but
That's
the,
probably it.
the pain. Yeah, I know. My dead grandfather just, hit a birdie into my eardrum. That's a golf
Nice.
sport.
Hi, and welcome to the Inner Moxie podcast, the podcast about not one, but two neurodivergent adults trying to live their best lives on the neuro D list and not hate themselves in the process. I'm your host, Ronnie.
And I'm Zanny.
And this week, we are talking about cults.
So, where are you on your Moxie meter today, Ronnie?
I am, let's say, I'll go with a good old out of 5. I will say I'm feeling it too. I feel like these past few weeks have been a little lower than I usually keep it, and maybe my demeanor doesn't quite match it.
Correct.
Which I don't think is a bad thing.
I don't think so either.
But yeah, I think just because it was like I've complained about it on the podcast before, but we had our inspection, which just causes a lot of anxiety, and then when I have an event like that, that just kind of overwhelms me, then I kind of live in like the aftermath of it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just like, I don't have energy to do much, but it's not like I magically need to make less money during that time span.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that procrastination and that, just adds up into more problems. And, but I think that drove me down to the 1, but I think I'm on the recovery. So I'm going to say it's a 2, but it's a climbing 2.
Okay. The trajectory is up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just, yeah, I don't know. It may crash again, but I'll take where it's at right now. So we'll go for that. How is your inner Moxie meter doing on this fine day?
Well, first of all, circling back to yours, you are a 2 out of 5, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just to clarify, in case we have a brand new listener on a good old landmark episode 10.
Uh-huh.
So, all right. So you're a 2 out of 5. I would say, I'm a 0 to 10 kind of person. I think it's going to be hard to put a number. It's definitely on the higher end and higher than it's been the last few weeks, despite all the whole week, because we're recording out of routine 4 days late, 3, I don't know, math. We usually record on a Tuesday and it's Friday, and that's because I requested it, because I ended up with a double ear infection this week, like bad, like diagnosed by a doctor, and she just kept saying it's really gnarly in there.
She probably didn't think you could hear her.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. I just am like, I told her, I was like, I feel crazy. People don't take it seriously. I tried to do the thing on the Kaiser app where you can talk to a doctor anytime and you just get an appointment or whatever, like a video or a call. And I know that you can't diagnose an ear infection over the internet. I know that, but it was Sunday and I didn't want to go to the urgent care because I couldn't get myself to leave my house on Sunday, because after I completed the first bit of my morning routine, I realized, I was like, oh shit, this is going to turn into a thing. This is going to turn into a bigger thing than it feels right now. I just knew it. And then it did. Anyway, the next day it was full blown fever. My right ear, this one, is what it has now, and you can't really see it. But this ear, the left ear, was the first one, and it was pulled out. My ear was markedly different, pulled out. And I didn't go swimming, and I don't know how it happened, but anyway, so that threw me off. I haven't done my morning routine or any of my routines really since Sunday morning, which I'm actually a little bit okay because I had very low expectations for myself. I also didn't take Adderall until today because
I was going to say, how'd you stick on your medications?
I just figured, why? I'm not expecting myself to do anything. So why do I need to take the drug that helps me make better choices when all my choices are literally stay on the couch and get better? And I'm usually not a couch sitter, but I could only fathom like laying on the couch because I was various levels of fever, and just now it's not hurting, but there's a lot of stabbing and a mild itching that goes on in bad ear infection. So it started over here on Sunday, and then yesterday this one was still going. So like all of that sucked, but it did help me. I gave myself permission to take care of myself, which I needed to write down because it is hard to do, for me, or it used to be a lot harder, I would say. So
yeah,
haven't numbered yet. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like you're also kind of hard on yourself, and I should be able to work through this. I should be able to da. But I was like, the doctor wrote me off work for the whole week. I didn't take the whole week off, but I did take 2 full days off, which is a lot for just being sick. And I just said just being sick. Like,
right.
That is not the right mentality. But, yeah.
Yeah. No, I was going to say it's, I know like for me, it's coming to an acceptance that I am not going to do what I'm supposed to do that day. Otherwise I will not get better. And like, or like, especially if it does have to do with, like a mental thing that I'm going through at the time. But it's, but also like physical of like, I also, happened to get, very sick in the tummy regions this week. Luckily you had already canceled, pushed back.
Yeah.
So I was like, I have time. But I think it was probably Wednesday that it was really bad. And I was like, just accept the fact you're going to have to make up the hours on the other job. You got, this and that. I have to take care of the kids, but lay in bed while they're at school, and then just set stuff up so it's easy when you get home, and don't spend the whole day like, no, I'll do this after the kids go to bed. I'll do this after this. I'll do this after this. Because then you just spend the whole day like stressed out and worried, and you're not getting any better.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, just sit down, stay hydrated, and do as little as possible. And accept that you'll have more work to do throughout the rest of the week. That's tomorrow's problem. Give yourself this, because if you don't, it's not going to get any better.
Right. Yeah. You're going to not be as productive anyway, and you're going to feel really shitty about it. And I would say this is partially an ADHD thing, but I think many people can relate to that. Plus, in the US in general, there's this whole work ethic thing where, we feel compelled to work a minimum of 40 hours a week or whatever it is, and like do our maximum and no excuses. And I struggle with that. I struggle with not taking enough breaks, not taking enough vacation time, not taking enough time when I'm sick, not, and then just burning out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and too, that's one of the things too. I don't even like, I struggle with that of like, have I done enough work today? Have I done enough? When like, I don't even like the model of, being paid. I like the idea better of being paid for your efficiency. So if you can get 40 hours of work done in 30 hours, then I think you should make the same amount of money. Nobody should make you stick around for no purpose, just for your time. In a large part of that, like, I'm not saying that's for everybody. A large part of that is I predominantly worked for myself for a lot of the last, for a lot of my adult life. But yeah, even when I'm like, no, it's all about efficiency, I'm still like, well, I didn't put in this many hours this week. And it's like, but you accomplished the thing you were supposed to accomplish. Relax now. That's, you did good. You should be able to give yourself some kind of break for that, but it is a weird very. I don't know if it's. I wouldn't. I do know it's a very American thing. I don't know if other countries don't have it. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But
I think we tend to idolize Europeans and their supposed, right? Because they can't be all of Europe because there's. I'm going to spoil things. Basically, exploitation is everywhere, and underpaid, overworked people are everywhere.
Oh, for sure.
So, but like the ideal of there's a mandatory like 6-week paid time off thing in all of Europe. You know, that's like an overgeneralization that we have, and an ideal that we fantasize about over here, which it probably isn't like that for a lot of people, but I think it is like that for more people over there than it is here, possibly.
Right.
I don't know. All of that to say, I don't know what number I'm at. Maybe I get a 7.5 keeps coming into my head, so we'll just go with that.
That's good.
I
do like that you were like, I feel better this week. Here are all the awful things that have happened to me.
But I really do. I mean, compared to I went from hearing everything to hearing a lot less. Like Dexter, the TV show, has been my friend this week because I've seen the series multiple times. It's one of those special interests, but I haven't revisited it in a while. So it's one of those things where I was like, okay, I can put this on. I'm interested while I'm awake. And when I fall asleep, I will know what has happened and where I was, and I won't feel like I missed something or compelled to like try and stay up or something. But I usually have my TV on like at like a volume 12, but it was up at 29:30 up there this whole week. So my neighbors got to hear all of the goings on in the show Dexter. But yeah, there's like little things like I'm not wearing any makeup. I never have my hair up, but I'm afraid to wash it until everything is fine, so it won't look good down. And I'm also afraid to have it down while it's super dirty because I don't want things getting in my ears. Like, I don't know. I'm just in this weird space with my ears. But I do feel better. I mean, I feel rested. I haven't slept so well in a while. So that's nice.
Good. I was going to say, just because you brought up Dexter, this is, I know, like on our list of possible episodes to do, we have like media and representation in media. And I remember there's an episode, and if this is your special interest, you might be able to remember the direct quote. I do not remember it. But there's an episode when Dexter was being the family man, which I really liked that era of Dexter. But where he was talking about Halloween is the one day a year that he feels like everybody else because everybody else is wearing a mask. And like and at that point, I didn't know I was neurodivergent. Like I had kind of bought into that thing that my ADHD went away, or maybe even was on the train of like, oh, I didn't have ADHD when I was a kid. They were just passing out Ritalin, like blah, blah, blah. So I wasn't even thinking of, about that in those terms. But I remember when he said that, started talking about that, like I just felt so seen. I was like, no, you get it. Didn't feel great that it was said by a serial killer. But
I mean, him being a serial killer is a big part of that show, but also not. Like I did actually have that experience in watching season 1. It is basically all about masking. And this is the first time that I've watched it since realizing and knowing that I'm neurodivergent. So I did see it differently. I mean, the way that people talked back then, I think this was like 04, 05, something like that. Like you can't say half the shit that they said on the show, it seems like.
Right.
But I was like, other than being a serial killer, like there's a lot of overlap with what he's got going on. It's like sociopathy basically, or like they say psychopath, which psychopath and sociopath aren't necessarily diagnoses in the DSM. Antisocial behavior or antisocial personality disorder is the thing that's in there. But anyway, who cares? But I mean, there's a lot of overlap, I mean, I would say that even though I feel like my feelings are different, I definitely have them. So that part is different. But the masking stuff, I was like, wow, no wonder I liked this so much. Like I didn't realize just how deep the masking went for me. And I don't know, that it probably was comforting when I started watching that show, because I looked like watching it again this week. I was like, wow, this is very, very much bringing, and no one talks about the mask thing. Everyone's just like, oh, he's masking because he's a serial killer. He has to hide himself. You know, it wasn't, I don't think people really grabbed on to that, what all of that was going to turn into, which how could they? No one was talking about masking really back then.
Right. Well, and it is weird, but like we've gone to like, you know, there's special interests that are circumscribed, not circumcised, circumscribed interests, and that you can't talk about sometimes. And like, killing bad people is certainly on that list, especially if you actually do it.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Like I have no problems talking about serial killers in general. All right. Well, it seems like we've maxed out our Moxie meter segment.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear yours is on the up because I know you're going through a tough one.
I was, and I've learned some lessons therein. I think I'm still learning them, so I don't know if I'm sharing yet exactly what I think was going on there, but interesting to note, but definitely not in that space anymore, which feels good.
That's good.
All right. Well, previous episode follow-ups and things. I made a couple flip comments, which I think now, if you've been listening, you might understand it. But if last episode was your first, there's something, I don't feel the need to explain myself, but I could definitely see someone being like, what are you saying? So the first thing is why I say things bluntly, like when I was talking about raping babies and stuff, you know, it's jarring. That is mostly intentional. Because it's not because it's shocking and I want to shock you. It's just, I don't think it's appropriate to refer to those things as sexual assaults, because while that is like the legal classification of things, it makes it much easier to talk about. And I don't think it should be.
Right. Oh, and you know what? I'll back you that when I went to do the edit, just the fact that we had said the word raping babies more than once, which now this episode also has. I feel like, but I did, like, it did catch me a little off guard. I'll admit that. But also, like, you know, we put the explicit title on all of our episodes. That's fair game. We weren't talking about an actual situation. And also I felt that in the way it came up, while certainly we may have been a little flippant, this is not a brag at all. I know a bunch of dead babies and raping babies jokes because I'm of a certain age, I've spent my time around and in the circles of edgelords. I don't feel like I felt like it was the natural progression of what we were talking about. I don't feel like you brought it up to be an edgelord. I don't feel like you brought it up so anything like that. And so like when I did come across it again, cause it is a little different to be outside the episode. Like it didn't get to me, and it felt like, you know, it may have been more on the extreme side of what we say on the podcast, but it certainly didn't feel like something we would cut out. Although, like, you know, if somebody was offended by it and didn't like hearing it, I'm not one of those, oh, go fuck yourselves, blah blah blah. It's like, well, I'm sorry. That's
like my intention is not to condone that act at all. And if I was talking about a specific case, I would definitely use that person's name and explain the events as described in whatever I was looking at or reading or the research I had done. But I just don't, and I don't think it's okay to just say, oh, Cosby molested these women while they were asleep. Like, that is the Disney version of what happened. So I do think that using accurate language and respecting victims is important. I just think there is a huge culture of like, I don't want to hear it. You know, like, don't tell me that this happened, but it's just like, I don't think that we should be used to saying sexual assault in everyday language if you're not a police officer or a person in a court. Like, I know that there's procedures, whatever, in that setting.
Right.
But I just think that creates too much space between the victim and what actually happened. That's just how I feel about it. That's my, and it's not right. And I just don't feel like the everyday person should just be used to saying things like molestation or sexual assault. Like, I just think those are too vague, and you can become very numb to those things, which those things should piss you off and make you want to throw up. That's how I feel.
All right.
So that's why I said stuff like that. And then I made another comment about, I was like, this is no disrespect to victims or anything, but I made some flip comment about, Jonestown, like, ugh, it's so basic. It's like the Starbucks of cults. The only reason I say that is because there's been covered so much. I think we did talk about that last time, but I just wanted to clarify, like, that is why it's been covered so much. And, it is a very shocking event that happened. And it started off what seemed like, race unification, which is a good idea. It's just like it feels like beating a dead horse a lot of the time, that when new quote things come up, in regards to that one or the Manson family or whatever it is, where it's just like almost glorifying like the leaders a little bit, or just new information or something, I don't know. That's what I mean when I say stuff like that too. It's just because there is a lot of space between me and that, and maybe that's not a good thing. I don't know.
Right. Well, and no, I hear you. I'll add that. I hear you. I definitely hear you. It is weird because something happened to me this week that just happens to involve the stuff you were just talking about. So I will bring it up now, master of segues that I am. No, I did a TikTok that happened to be about Jonestown. And there's a clip that had been going around of some apologist Christian guy who was saying, the reason I believe in Jesus is because, there's no other story in time where so many people willingly, speaking of, I believe about the apostles, so many people died for a lie, bringing up how all the apostles died terrible deaths. He's like, name me another story. And to my point was Jonestown. It's an obvious, and the whole point of the thing was, this is a very dangerous precedent to equate factuality to conviction. People can be very convicted about things that are not only wrong but are dangerous. That was the point I wanted to make with my little TikTok. And so I made one, and I put a trigger warning at the beginning. That it just said, and it was a visible thing. It said trigger warning, mass suicide. And I popped it up on TikTok, and it was up there for like 3 days, and had literally, not like I pull huge numbers on TikTok, but this video had literally 1 view and then nothing. And I was like, 1 view? That's weird. And so what I did was I pulled it off, I deleted it, and I reposted it without the trigger warning on there, without the TW mass suicide. And I did that earlier today, and not like it's pulling amazing numbers.
More than one.
But people are viewing it. People, some people are liking it. It is many, many times. It is almost doubled what the last viewing
you
was.
Got 1.5 views. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not in TikTok, but that might be a lot.
Yeah. But it was weird because, like, best I can figure is that because I put, because I put words on there that said mass suicide, that tripped something up in the algorithm that was like, well, we don't know if this guy broke any rules, but don't go showing this to everybody.
Oh.
And so when I took it down and replaced it without that, I was like, because it is a big thing on social media. TikTok's the one at Band Ronnie, that I hang out on the most. But you do start to, go beyond like sexual assault. People will call SA. People refer to suicide or murder as unaliving, or guns as bang bangs, in an attempt not to trip up algorithms.
I've heard that.
Which is weird because like I don't think that is all together a bad thing. But like, the one case scenario I bumped into it, it led a video without a trigger warning, which I think is more, responsible to have on there. I had to take off that thing to make it go through. And so, I'll probably figure out some editing techniques going forward to put it on not using TikTok itself. But yeah, I just because you were speaking of language and and Jonestown, which I assume isn't the last mention we're going to have on this particular episode.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there are just so many. Anyway, I don't want to get there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. Oh, yeah. And I wrote it on the thing because of this, and it all relates. So I did watch Baby Reindeer. It's a series on Netflix. I watched it yesterday, and I'll probably have to watch it again, but it is the most perfect show as far as representing all the horrible shit that can happen. And
what's this show called again?
It's called Baby Reindeer.
Okay.
Anyway, it touches on rape, drugs, grooming, stalking, mental health issues, trauma, exploitation of trauma via this. I mean, there's so many things. It is hard to watch, I can imagine, especially if you have such things in your history. But I do think that it is coming from a different angle and a very important show. And I'll just say that. Yeah.
What's it about? Because you've brought up all the things that are in it, but
it's about all those things. So it's about this guy that it starts off with this guy he's like a late 20s guy working at a bar. And this middle-aged woman who is supposed to be like 45 or something. I'm like, 5 years away. Who is
real quick, is this like a docu-series or it's a fictional series?
It's fictional.
Okay.
But I mean, I would suppose that many of these things have happened to many people. Oh, and it's about not being believed. Like, it's all like, it's hard to summarize it without ruining a lot of it, but you learn new things every episode, and it just gets more fucked up in a way that needs to happen. Why do people not report things? This woman is stalking this guy. Police, he doesn't want to go talk to the police. And then it's all about like why he hasn't gone to report. And it just highlights all of the issues why people don't report things. Male reporting, being stalked, being, there's a lot of bias there. And the first thing, I don't think this is ruining anything, but like the cops are like, well, why'd you wait so long? Like, that is the worst question you could ask. Like, it's not going to increase the likelihood that person's going to do it again. It's not going to make that person feel welcome or feel heard or feel prioritized or feel anything other than marginalized and like, oh, you're right, I shouldn't even be here. Like, it's so messed up. Anyway, it was triggering in all the right ways for me because I have a very social justice minded thing.
Right. Social justice minded mind.
Yes. So anyway, I recommend everybody watch it. It's not easy to watch, but it is important to watch, I would say. And it starts off kind of funny, so it kind of hooks you because like the lady stalking him is like I don't know. She's just too much. I don't know. It's just I don't want to give everything away because I'm in my head right now. I'm just like, I'm gonna either tell every detail of this, and that is not the point. I don't know how to cliffhang it because I don't know how to summarize it. So that's where I am with it. But I'm sure there's something that could tell you on the internet about it better than I can.
I know that thing of like having to bail out or describe everything that ever happened.
Yes.
It does remind me, and this is probably one of the early signs of my neurodivergence. I remember when I was a kid, I watched So I Married an Axe Murderer. Fine film. And I thought it was great. And so I went to tell my mom how funny it was. And like I just started talking about it. And then I literally laid out like the whole movie for her. And by the time she was done, she would very politely listen to me. I'll give it to my mom on this one. She's very, very politely listened to me. But at the time it was done, I remember she was literally serving dinner and she goes, Ronnie, you've been talking for 3 hours. I could have just watched the movie.
Twice.
Yeah, right? She's like, you started this 3 hours ago. Next time I'll just watch the movie.
Wow.
So I very much get that inclination of like, oh, and then this happened. Well, and this is the great part in this.
Yeah. Anyway, it's hard to draw that line, especially when this is one of those shows I know that I need to watch a few times. I don't know how many times because I need to absorb it. Like I absorb everything at face value first. It is really hard for me until I listen to these episodes. I miss half the shit half the time. I know it like in the conversation, which is like, oh, well, no wonder some of my conversations go the way they do because I just miss things and need to replay them.
Right.
But here we literally can.
I will say having recorded conversations is not something the majority of people have been around. I think it would surprise anybody if they read back their own conversations.
For sure. That's true. I just like some of the jokes or the leads or whatever, everything is, it's so obvious to me how literal minded I am at first. And then I have to listen to it and then I can hear it. So I guess I'm part audio learner. And, anyway, it's just that part is fascinating, which, record all your conversations, everyone. You might learn some things.
Just make sure everybody you have a conversation with knows that you're doing that.
True story. Otherwise, you'll be in this show, Baby Reindeer. Okay, so then there was this other thing that we wanted to follow up on from. Yes. I mentioned last week that Nexium, anyway, I wasn't super, honestly, the vow, Nexium, all of that, like it's mildly interesting and also triggering to me, which is probably why I'm not as engaged in it as I was with some other stuff. Anyway,
and just so everybody's on the same page, The Vow is a Netflix show about it's on
HBO
Nexium?
about Nexium, and I can't even remember.
It is Nexium like a cult?
Nexium is a cult. It's Keith Raniere. But then the other side, the sex cult part is called something else. And I forgot. And I watched half an episode today and I just can't, it's just not sticking. And part of it is because Keith Raniere is very triggering to me. And I realize why is because a lot of the, they have a lot of video footage of his actual words and they show a lot of it, which fine, that's what happens in a lot of these types of documentaries. But for me, it reminded me very closely to how I was treated in a marriage of mine. So it's triggering in that way, not in a way where I'm unglued, not in a way. It's just like, I don't want to spend a lot of time there. And a lot of other cults are extremely fascinating. This one is not, but it does, anyway. So they did cure people of Tourette's, which is the whole purpose of bringing it back up. So, and in watching the episode about it again today, I forget what it's called. I should have wrote it down. I wrote everything else down. I have all these notes. This is all about... just what I watched today. But anyway, so
you've been literally not in the greatest headspace. So we'll forgive you.
Thank
I
you.
speak for the entire audience. We forgive you.
Forgive me or forget me. That was a show I used to watch with my best friend Natalie. Hi Natalie, called Forgive or Forget. Anyway,
I'm
this
not
was
familiar with it.
The 90s, different rabbit hole. All right, so Nexium, and that is not what the seminars were called, and I didn't write it down. But basically what they did, how the people who were in it describe it is we limit or empower ourselves by choosing our emotional state. So I could be very in the documentary, I forget her name too. God, I blocked a lot of this, which this is not like me when it comes to most cults. But she's like, I could choose to be really angry and have a big emotional reaction, but I'm in control of that choice. I made that choice to engage that. So on the flip side, I don't have to be angry. So that's like the basic tenets of how they cured some people of Tourette's. More specifically, they break down stimulus and responses and disconnect them. So in general, let's see. Well, I didn't write the general stuff, so there you go. So a person who was, quote, cured and is still, as far as I know, in the cult or in the NXIVM, whatever this part is called, just email us and tell us if it's going to scratch that itch for you. But the itch for a person with Tourette's is whatever thought, and then the scratch is the tick. So that's how this person described it. So for him, it was, whenever he would meet someone, or, what's the worst thing that I could possibly say right now is what his compulsion was. And then the tick was scratching it. So it was like biting or, whatever his ticks were. So what they did is they identify the trigger, or the impulse, and they figure out whatever that is, whatever the core is, and disconnect that stimulus from that response. So for the compulsion from the action. And then the problem with that for other people was that they were basically just exploiting all of their trauma, because they have to find all of their fears and where all of these things are deep rooted. And so they're telling this comes from a deep rooted place. You are doing this, you have control of this, and this is how. And it did make people stop having tics, and people were very excited by that. This one guy went super well. They didn't speak for the other people who were involved in these studies and experimenting on these people, but one of them they did, and it came out in all other ways. Like, at the end of the day, NXIVM was not a licensed place. This wasn't evidence-based stuff that they were doing.
Right.
So, I think I could say her name because her name was in the documentary. Her name is Isabella. She went through the treatment, and she started attributing tics to failures and being a failure. She was like, if I'm having a tic, that means I'm a terrible person. She felt pressured to go off of all of her meds. It increased anxiety. Her personality changed. She wasn't having tics, but she was like imploding as a person and just becoming a shell of herself. She said, okay, so then there's this whole other concept of, if you have a goal, there's no reason for you to hit it unless you have a consequence for not hitting it. So that could go either way, and it went the bad way most of the time. But okay, so in the example from the person that was very involved in it, consequences for not meeting goals makes you committed to stop your habit, which sounds okay. Maybe I could get behind that for some things, but then it turned into stuff like if you didn't hit your goal, which would be for in the case of Tourette's, like if you had a tic, then you would have to have your consequence, and they were mostly physical. So run a mile, don't eat for the day, like stuff like that, where it was just seemed disproportionate, which, in the ABA world, which is the world I come from, it's not so much the actual consequence. A consequence in and of itself is just what happens after a behavior occurs, right? It doesn't, it's not always negative. It's just whatever. Not
always a punishment.
Right. Punishment and consequences are different.
Right.
When we're talking about behavior modification. But we don't, anyway, it all just got really messed up for a lot of people, and it just created this whole other, it brought up a lot of trauma, it created more trauma, and then there was nothing to do with that. And then it was just like, oh, well, you're choosing this. Oh, well, why are you being attention seeking? You're choosing to act this way. Why are you acting like that? Okay, well, that's basically it. So like that they cured it but they created a lot of other problems. So like Tourette's is very invasive.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they can take some clout for being able to get in there, but all of the other damage being done, it's just unethical to experiment on
Right.
people like that, like without
I was
having
gonna say,
any scientific backing. And then you have Keith Raniere, who's a narcissist in the background, just like pulling the strings, like, oh, you just do this, and it's just like nothing is ever good enough. You are never going to be good enough. I'm going to actually now hold all of the fears that you have because I have to list. You have to list them out in this whole process. And so then he has all of those and can exploit them at any time for his benefit.
Right. So if as somebody who hasn't seen the show or and literally heard about none of this,
Okay.
it's I'm gonna tell me if this is a fair way to sum it up. It was like you said, it was a cult that ran some unethical I guess you would call them unethical experiments on people with Tourette's that have come out to show some benefits in fighting that particular
Diagnosis?
condition.
Yeah.
Have come out with showing benefits when fighting that condition. But the benefits may not outweigh the harm done. And we've yet to have a scientific, a
Evidence-based?
evidence-based, like certified scientific view on that data.
Yeah. And like the Tourette's thing was just a side plot, an accident that happened. So then they were like, oh, we can capitalize on this. But they were doing this for people in general who just wanted to be better. So that's how it's a cult.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Tourette's thing was just like a, hey, maybe we can actually like make money off of this because people will pay a lot of money when nothing else works.
Right.
So yeah, your summation is correct, except for the focus is on people just wanting to be better and wanting to clear their trauma, I guess, essentially.
Okay.
And Keith Raniere being the holder of all of that information. If you were like in the sex cult part, it's hard to describe, and I really don't want to get into it right now.
Okay. No. Oh.
But I mean, if you were so inclined, you could go watch it on HBO. I know you have it, and listeners, you can too. It's not one I really want to cover just because, as I said, reminiscent of a time I didn't love.
No, I get that. Well, and it's something I wish that more people kind of understood about using language like triggering or triggered or trigger warnings or stuff like that. Is that I think people in their heads kind of equate it to like, oh, we're going to talk about something kind of like equate it to like movie ratings of like, oh, we're just talking PG, so there's no trigger warnings, or, we're talking R or NC-17, so we need big trigger warnings. And like, obviously there's going to be some correlation there. But I think like, I've talked about before, I don't know if I've brought it up on the show or not, that my son had an incident where he almost drowned, and he was in the hospital for 4 days, and it legitimately, it changed my priorities in life when it happened. Like it was a big life-changing thing to me. It has made it really hard to deal with any media that involves water. I don't know that I'll ever watch Jaws again. And that's not Jaws's fault. Jaws is obviously not R-rated, but that's literally something that triggers me. There are, I think, and there, in the reason on my other show that I do put trigger warnings at the beginning, I think there are some things that are kind of universally recognized as something that could very easily trigger somebody. if you're talking about, I say sexual assault, not to downplay rape like we were talking about earlier, but to cast a wider umbrella, because there's still sexual assault that doesn't involve rape per se, and that's also atrocious. But yeah, and so like the fact that it triggers you makes total sense because that's your specific situation.
And it's only hard to talk about. I vacillate between like I'm an open book. I would say I will be very candid about the facts of my life. The whole thing isn't just my story to tell. There's a lot that goes into it. Like I've cleared the negatively impacting trauma from that. And I know this because everything has changed in the last year. And I got divorced, I don't know, 3 years ago is when it was finalized. Going on 4 of, anyway. But
I know it's still 4, but congratulations.
Thank you. I just had my divorce date anniversary on the 4th. It was Easter 2021 when the paperwork was like dated. I was like, interesting. I have been resurrected.
It's like I'm that, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I very much love his entire family. The cadence of communication is different, but I want to be mindful, but also tell my own story, and that is where the struggle is sometimes. But I will say that relationship, looking back now, it's always easy to see things when you're not in it. But, and I guess this has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about anyway. But I was a prime candidate to be, in that situation. So, yeah. So like, I will drop things in here and there, I wish that person no malintent. I also don't wish to protect, when it is unnecessary. And I also don't wish to gossip. So it's like it's a hard line, it's a place where I've healed, and it's definitely a part of my life. And all of it was not bad, but a lot of it was, and that's okay. And that's just where I'm at with it. But it's always just I don't want to mask up on it. I don't know. It's just like I don't know.
It's a weird spot. I wondered too, like, I know this is something that I try and be careful of, in not only when talking on the podcast, but when talking to people in general about different relationships at different points. I know we've talked about before, just kind of that compulsion to not be misunderstood and to be truthful and to be really truthful. And I don't know, like, I guess it wouldn't be untruthful, but part of me always feels like when I talk about somebody and they're not there to say anything back, that always feels kind of icky to me. Even if they're like obviously this doesn't go for like celebrity or something like that, but somebody in my personal life, even if I don't particularly like that person, it always feels kind of like that icky one-sided thing that I don't think is fair and I don't like.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand that. The way I think of it too is like, anything that I say, would I say that if that person was in the room or in earshot? And if that is the case, then I will say it.
That's probably a smart rule to have.
Yeah. So that's where I land on it. Because otherwise, how would I say anything? Like that classic overthinking and too many options. I had to implement something. Otherwise, and I learned that in therapy school. Someone said that, and it was in regards to talking about clients. Don't talk about a client. Like, how would you be talking about this client if they were in the room? Because we were in training. So we were like in classes meant for, like case conferencing, basically. Like, oh, I'm having this issue or this is going on and I don't really know how to handle this, or like this doesn't seem to be working, or what approach, those kinds of things, and it always stuck with me. Like, talk about that person as if they were sitting right next to you. So that has kind of like stuck with me and generalized into other areas. And I wasn't perfect at it. I learned how to downplay and like diss people, basically, like to make not even to make myself feel better, but just like point out everything that's wrong first. And so I try not to do that much these days, and it's not a habit I have anymore, but it was for a really long time. So like I think that was a big thing in like how I was able to reverse that. Like, I wouldn't want someone to talk shit on me,
No.
And if someone was talking about me, like, do it, like, whatever. But for my own self to sleep at night, because I'll think about it for the rest of my life, probably, if I said something I shouldn't have. So
I know this might be, or this goes against, I don't want to say common knowledge or common sense, but like, I think a common thing that's put out in the universe. Whereas for the most part, if you have something mean to say about me, it's like, please say it behind my back.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want you I don't want it to the point where it's poisoning the well. Like, I wouldn't want you telling my children horrendous things about me. I wouldn't want, but like, if you are a friend of mine and something I did really, really bothered you, I hope you could politely come up to me and we can politely talk about it. But if you need to vent to a mutual friend of ours, I'm not going to lose my mind about that. I assume I have friends out there who have said bad things about me to other people in my friend group. And I'm not trying to play victim. I've certainly done that as kind of part of that communal, like, no, we all love each other at the end of the day. But
I mean, people are people. You can't get along with everyone all the time. People are going to piss you off. People I love the most piss me off. And I know I piss other people off too. I don't expect anything different. But, whatever someone wants to say, they can say it. I don't, I feel like if you are a person that chronically talks shit about people, like, that is part of your character and people understand that. So I'm not, and I, in the last few years, have really grown as far as self-esteem is concerned. So, there's only so much within my control. The things that I do, I try to be a congruent person because it's just part of who I am, but also, I don't know. I don't like hypocrisy and I wouldn't want to perpetuate it. And like, yeah, some people are a little bit, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But like, for the most part, I don't like to say one thing and do another thing. Those things make no sense to me. And not everyone is everyone's cup of tea. And that's okay. Yeah. And I'm at peace with that now. I wasn't for a really long time, but I feel a lot more peaceful now. So starting talking about cults this week. I say starting, we may finish it. I don't know. There's a lot and a little, and this is an area of my special interest. So it actually turned into some kind of like pressure because I'm just like with the religion episode. I was like, God, this is such a broad fucking topic. I'm not going to be able to do it justice. Right. Not that this sits alone on my shoulders at all. It's just, like, oh no, I've already said that I really am into these things. And now, and I got a little bit in that headspace, partially coming off of like, this is the longest conversation I've had since a week ago because I've been out of commish. I did have a video meeting earlier.
Lazily sitting on your couch.
Not lazily. Sickily. Unable to get off the couch except to feed the cats. Anyway, so all of that aside, we're just going to do what we're going to do. And that's it. So, all right. Well, cults it's a broad topic. So I thought it would be good to kind of define it via the dictionary and then otherwise just to get an idea of what we're liking as far as what we're talking about it. So in the dictionary, a cult could be a religion regarded as unorthodox or spurious, or like it came to be, I guess. It could be great devotion to a person, idea, object, movement, or work. A system of religious beliefs and ritual. Formal religious veneration, or a system for the cure of disease based on dogma set forth by its promulgator. which I
Oh, I know
understand
the word you're
as
trying.
like, okay, this person figured out that turmeric cures migraines, and then you become
Right.
a devotee or something like that. That's how I interpret
Mhm.
that. Because
That sounds reasonable. I'll back you on that.
because I don't even understand why I would use a word no one uses, but okay. And then Wikipedia, which is not known for being super credible, but I needed
I will because we haven't had enough sidetracks. I will say this: one of the things I absolutely adore about Wikipedia is because people talk about all the time about how it's not accurate, and there's certainly inaccuracies within Wikipedia and ways to mess with Wikipedia. But I'll say it has vastly more information and more correct information than any encyclopedia that's ever been created. And it is
on a technicality, I would agree.
yeah. And I would say even on like a percentage basis, it's good vastly outweighs where it's wrong. I would in a world where we have a very subjective internet, where these bubbles, political bubbles of people that think exactly like you, and in a world of algorithms, and I'm not horribly against algorithms, but you can go to like any website you want, and we'll just pick something like Donald Trump and type in Donald Trump. You're going to get different answers on Google. If two different people type them in, you're going to get different results on Facebook. You're going to get different results on Twitter that have all been curated to you in some way. You will get, but everybody will get the same thing off of Wikipedia. And I think that's an important research, or I think that's an important resource in a world where we are continually losing objectivity, especially in an online sphere. So I will say that in defense of Wikipedia.
Okay.
But yes, I will acknowledge it also can have problems.
It's just not a place that you should cite in a scholarly article or in a presentation, which happened when, I mean, okay, this was 2006 or 2007. I don't know. One of those. The hang up I have with it is from this event specifically. I was in college. Long story short, my senior year, my last semester, I had a mental health event and dropped out and went back a year and a half later. So in that year and a half, I had to take a science class, and we had to do these presentations. I don't know. It doesn't matter what the content was. The fact that this person, I was like, oh, this is a pretty good presentation. And then she's like, and credit where credit is due. Thank you, Wikipedia. And I was like, this is trash. This is nothing. This is not anything. So that's, one of the hangups. But to your point, I can appreciate that. And I use them, so I guess I don't hate them. And this is not a scholarly article. Cool. There we go. Anyway, so they define cult as a group which is typically led by a charismatic or self-appointed leader who tightly controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of...
really changes the definition.
It really does. It's dimmer in this space than it looks on the video. Who tightly controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices which are considered deviant outside of the norms of society. So that's kind of like the basic. I was like, that's a pretty decent working definition of cults, because like you could get real loosey-goosey with it and say, like anything is a cult, and cult doesn't always mean bad. Like there are cult followings of things.
I have often described myself as a fan of cult movies.
Yeah, cult movies is a big one. There's lots of things, but for our intents and purposes, we are talking about the divergent and the not so great way of cults, because they always end up being exploitive and destructive, right? Physically, mentally, whatever, both. So.
Yeah, and I think when you use the term cult outside of when you use the term cult, maybe when talking about a group of people, that exploitative and damaging, or at least are part of that definition.
Yeah.
Because you do have like who is it, the UU church, the United Universalist or something like that. That's like a church that lets in members of all different beliefs.
Unitarians?
And yeah, Unitarian or something along those lines. But they're a group that doesn't, I hope I have the right one. But yeah, they're a group that doesn't do that much, or doesn't do any damage or anything like that. And they are a bit smaller, and they have a lot of those religious things compiled to them, but I don't think people generally ascribe cult to them because they lack that harmful element.
Right. And
I might do it just jokingly from time to time. But.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to be said for appreciating traditions. Religion tends to provide those types of things, and people find comfort there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, obviously the caveat of you got to pay attention to what that tradition is doing, especially in a modern society. But yes.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's kind of like the draw, which is why a Unitarian church might exist, like it, or I don't know if it's just Unitarian, but there's also like the Baha'i church, whatever, like it's just like all faiths in one, just kind of, the underpinnings are unification and acceptance and tolerance versus, others are bad, keep everything in, you need to be here. We're going to account for all of your time. We need all of your money. We need all of your time. You can't sleep. Like these are all.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting into that, the basic tenets are, there's like 4 major things that are specific to cults that make them negative and destructive. So the first one being authoritative control or authoritarian control. So encourages maximum dependency. People in the cult must feel incapable of living an individual life outside the norms of the group. So dependent on the group. Extremist beliefs. Cult members hold very dogmatic and extreme beliefs. They are unable to question these belief systems without fear of reprisal or punishment from the leader or other members. Isolation from society. As soon as new members join a cult, other adherents work hard to isolate them from family members and friends. This helps fulfill mind control aspirations of the cult leader. And then veneration of a single individual. Charismatic leaders are often the center of most cults.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the 4 things. Did you have a comment? Sorry, I'd love to cut everyone off all the time.
No. I thought that secret handshake would be on there.
Well, that could be part of, I don't know. Well, if the authoritarian leader said it. There's this whole thing of cult of personality too, which I didn't write down, but it's like generally the leaders are very charismatic, very, make you feel like what they're saying is accurate. And the only thing, which would be a lot of it, because some of the shit that gets talked about, it's like, if you were in a state of mind, not in that setting, it may sound wackadoo to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and two, that is one of the things I have come to question over the last few years. I will say specifically since a certain event in 2016. Like when we talk about charismatic leaders, right? And kind of like these silver-tongued, people that, that just could pull people in. And, but then I look at, a leader like Donald Trump, who became president of the United States. I'm trying not to make this overtly political, but also not ignore the fact that the man's, plenty wrong with the man. And like, you had I'm not comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, but that was something they always said, like, oh, Hitler. And I don't speak German. But they're like, no, it was just the passion with which he talked, and he was able to convince this whole country that blah, blah, blah. And then like, now I'm like, maybe he just sounded like an idiot too, and just people were in the right place to believe him for whatever reason. And that's still something I kind of believe that Donald Trump, like he's obviously not a brilliant public speaker, but people are in the place. There's something about there's something in the air now that he happened to luck out and be in that place. And now people are following him. And I wonder how much that is for other cult leaders. Because like we brought up Jonestown. I've heard Jim Jones speak before. He sounds like a grumpy old grandpa to me. At no point would I be like, this is a guy I want to follow.
But if you're listening with your right now ears, sure. But in the time in the 60s, like that's how people were talking. He studied reverends. Like he had this aspiration of being a black reverend, if we're being frank. And he did have some good intentions in some realms because he was a white man, loved black people and wanted everyone to be equal. So on that one thing, he wasn't wrong. Okay.
Right.
But it's all the other stuff. And then, narcissism and ego kind of takes control there.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think once, just, with Jonestown in particular, once you convince like 900 people, 300 of which being babies, which is not information I generally know. I just did a TikTok on it earlier this week. But when you there's not a lot of good things that you could do in your life to even out that particular monstrosity. But even like Heaven's Gate, and some of those, I don't know, like some of it, like I wonder how much of it is an actual charm and how much of it you just happen or charm or charisma, but how much of it sometimes might be you just happen to be the right shape of the piece that was missing from these people's lives, and a lack of responsibility or whatever allows you to take advantage of that.
Yeah. And I mean, when we're talking about charisma, though, I do want to point out, like you brought up Heaven's Gate. He looks like a crazy person when we're looking at him now. He has, a weird look in his eyes.
Well, now he's dead.
Now he's dead. But when we're with our now eyes, or when we first looked at it, we're looking at this person knowing that they're a cult leader, that they've influenced lots of people. So that definitely influences the way that we're perceiving this person.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was
literally cutting you off to tell you were absolutely right. Oh, that's a very valid point. And also too, we're talking about members that are leaders that were so big that they have become part of the zeitgeist of that.
Right.
Not Heaven's Gate, but Jonestown was before we were born. So we have years of story and media, both real and fictionalized, built around that real thing. It's like I always remember a film studies teacher told me a lot of people don't like Casablanca because they think it's cliche, and Casablanca is only cliche because it was so good that everybody after them copied it. So now eyes that's a really good way to put it, because it's
we're ascribing all of the things that we already know to watching this person talk, which it's fucking creepy. Yes. But like back then, maybe it wasn't, and they're not winning millions of people either, but like charismatic enough to draw enough people and be convincing enough. And it wasn't just him. They went by T and Doe, and the woman, I don't remember who was T and who was Doe, but she was kind of like the brains of that. And it was
this is Heaven's Gate, right?
Heaven's Gate, yeah. And she was the brains and kind of like the one that came up with a lot of the theology, I would say. But then she passed away. So they had there was a lot of, evolution within their belief system there anyway. But I didn't even have that one on the list because I just figure everyone already knows about them, But it did give kind of like a segue into, like the general risk factors before we talk about neurodivergence in cults.
Yeah.
So I found things from two different websites. So the first one, they said high hypnotizability, which I also added susceptibility, probably, like
Right.
being easily influenced. This
Right.
doesn't, and I'll get to this point later, but that doesn't mean someone who is, um, uneducated. That just means someone who
No.
is open-minded in whatever way you want to take that, is how I interpret it.
Yeah. Well, and two, like, it's hypnotism is a weird thing that kind of, because it literally is. I mean, like, and I may be wrong that it's the exact dictionary definition, but the common definition, the title it's given on things is the power of suggestion. And I really think that is, some people are just more like, I think if you go to like a live hypnotist show, I don't think the people that get kicked off stage versus the people that stay on stage, that there's any intelligence difference or anything like that. Just the people that stay on stage for whatever reason in that particular scenario, we're more likely to go with the suggestion of pretending to be asleep.
Yeah.
Or to be asleep.
And
they would be,
I mean, I do think that I will never fully understand that, because I don't think I would be able to be hypnotized, especially in that setting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it has to do with inhibitions. And I think this relates to autism in some way. And I don't know further beyond that. Not because I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I think I can't fucking relax sometimes, is what I think the problem is. And I think that your brain, some people have an easier time getting to a more relaxed state, and that is very difficult for me.
Yeah. Well, and two, I will say this. A lot of times that things like I file hypnotism under kind of the broad umbrella of magic tricks. And a lot of people have this kind of idea about, I really love magic and magic tricks. And people have this idea that you are fooled by a magic trick because you're stupid. And it's not. The magician is just kind of taking advantage of assumptions you've made, which doesn't make you stupid. Every morning we get out of bed and assume that there is not, a snake at our feet. It's a pretty safe assumption. It's how we go through life. And magicians are able to take advantage of that to some degree. But actually, a lot of magic is harder to pull on little kids because they haven't built up that those daily assumptions that you need to make. And so I think hypnosis is a lot like that, where I don't even want to say fall for hypnosis. The people that hypnosis works on, it's not an indicator of intelligence. It's not an indicator of slyness or street smarts or anything like that. It's just what people are more able to do that in that situation. Able and will, and more people that are suggestible in that particular situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So then another risk factor listed was strong ability for concentration and vivid imagination. I guess. I don't know.
I mean, it sounds a lot like outside the box thinking, which which is something that I suppose you would, we like to, as people who do outside the box thinking, I think we like to promote it as a good thing. Mm-hmm. And it certainly is a good thing in a lot of situations. But, if you're thinking outside of the box on how to do something not great, then maybe it's not the greatest.
Yeah.
Or if you're able to imagine, a world that somebody is painting for you more vividly, particularly if that world holds some kind of
utopian ideal or whatever the purpose of the cult is, whatever the tenets are that you're pushing for, the good quote parts. I guess I could see that. Again, super literal here. So other risk factors, learning disorders, autism specifically is a risk factor. Substance abuse issues, which makes sense. Trauma,
Yes.
unresolved sexual issues. And I understand this to mean not necessarily trauma, but maybe a person who was raised Christian, they are gay, they do gay things, and don't want to be gay. I kind of think that falls under that,
Right.
because there's a whole thing with that, or, you know, something maybe along those lines. So like maybe they're unresolved because that person hasn't been able to resolve who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
And I think too, there may be an issue of, because sex is such a taboo in American culture, that if you have, and I don't mean this in any, I mean this by the dictionary definition, not the context. If you have any deviant sexual proclivities, then hearing somebody talk about that openly, maybe you know, that I could see where that could build a trust really quick with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they also listed phobias. So I guess having very specific phobias. I don't know how. It just didn't give any explanations, by the way, the thing that I got this from, which was a relatively okay source. Like not super vetted here, but I mean, I guess I could see it. So then they also added something that, you know, in recent history that have also been identified as risk factors. So just the pandemic itself has increased the likelihood for some people.
Okay.
And part of that, you know, isolation, I did not type this right. Lack of thought, I'm going to say, not tough. If you're weak.
No, let's go with lack of tough.
Lack of tough. If you are strong and weak. Yeah, okay. Lack of thought. That still doesn't make sense, though. Lack of tough means nothing. Okay, so we'll just go with social distancing. Oh, touch. It's touch. Lack of touch. So like there's that whole thing in the last 4 years of, you know, don't touch me, which is fine for me because I'm not a hugger. But, you know, for some people, you know, that especially littler children, or, you know, even probably your children were affected. You know, you can't physically interact with people in a way that, you know, was customary, I guess you could say.
I will say this too. Shit. I wish I had the direct quote in front of me. Maybe I'll bring it for next week's episode. But there is a not, this is going to touch on a separate issue or a separate episode that we've talked about doing, but, it certainly, I think, kind of implies here, because a lot of the behaviors are the same, that you kind of find that lack of touch. I think that young men, that you find that a lot in, and specifically incels, you're going to see that. And I want to be very careful on how I talk about this. That is no excuse for incel behavior, whether that behavior is extreme or moderate.
And by incel, you mean involuntary celibacy, right?
Yes. Involuntary celibate.
Okay.
But yes, and incels are, and this isn't, you know, you could describe somebody like me in high school, because I was so painfully awkward and silent. Like dating was not a thing I did in high school. And so like I had all those fucking hormones raging through me and everything like that. But I just, you know, I didn't have the kind of, social understanding or, confidence in myself or whatever it may be to make those kinds of connections.
Same.
And yeah. And you find that,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, you're all good. But you find that a lot in the incel community. And I think what makes the incel community different than somebody like me is that they start to blame women for it. Women today which, that goes back as far as you want to go back. But they don't, they don't recognize, they'll go out with this guy who's an asshole, but they don't realize a nice guy like me. And yeah, I speaking from being there, that is a horrible way that it plays out. And I would even though incel culture I'd say it isn't a cult because it doesn't have a formalized leader, but I think that's about all that's separating it from a cult at this point. And a cult with very dangerous ideas. But that doesn't mean that, it isn't a very real thing, those emotions. And that it isn't very important to try and find a way to deal with them. And I need to be extra specific here. By deal with them, in no universe do I mean, hey, we need to go out and hug little weirdos like Ronnie. That is not what I mean at all. But lack of touch, especially through that particular age, I can definitely see creating spaces in your head for bad people to take advantage of.
Yeah.
Which
sure.
I know I just want to be extra clear. I'm saying that is not a defense of any type of behavior because
no, for sure. I mean, there is a stereotype. So since I'm in a profession where, we work with children, we try to hire males because there are many reasons. Men aren't always attracted to jobs where you work with kids, and it's not because they don't want to. I don't think all the time. It's because there is a lot of bias there. Why do men want to work with children with autism? Or right. Not even children with autism. Why would a man want to be a nanny? That's a woman's
right.
job. There's a lot of that, and I don't think that that's good.
No.
And that's not a feminist way of thinking too, just for the anti-fems out there. It's not about
right.
pressing down men to elevate women. Both coexist, and everyone brings a lot to the table. It's just injustices. And in this sense, there is a bias against men in working with kids. And then it's not even just that. It's okay, so I have, this is a tangent, but it's pretty telling. I had this
tangent away.
I was supervising this case. We were working on toilet training with this kid. I think he was 6. And he had not autism, but I forget what it was called, but a significant brain disorder, degenerative. It caused, muscle degeneration, all of this stuff. So he was 6, working on, urinating on the toilet, and he would wear a diaper because, whatever. So this guy was working with him. They were in the backyard. Or the nanny, or I don't remember who was there that day, less than 10 feet away. But, he's working with the kid out there doing our programs, whatever. And then the kid's diaper was, I guess, too heavy, and it just dropped. This poor kid, it was so skinny, and his diaper got heavy, and so it just dropped. And I was in the house, but right where, I don't know, just on the other side. And right. I see this staff running in, and I'm like, what happened? And he was like, his pants fell down. And I was like, well, bring him in and take him to the bathroom, but that was very telling to me. Why are you shouldn't have to feel that freaked out. If it was me out there, I would be like, oh, let's pull up your pants. Let's go to the bathroom, Yeah. But that male staff's initial reaction was I got to get the fuck out of here because someone could accuse me of something, which that's messed up. Mm-hmm. There's a bias there too. Women are offenders also.
Yeah. This is something I've said before, I think, on the show, and I'll say it again. The patriarchy is not doing anybody any favors. Mm-hmm. So stop supporting it. It's not going to help you out.
Right.
Men and women. There's women that support
there's so many. We should cover this another time.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Okay. So, so then after the lack of touch and then social distancing issues, social and political polarization, as you already mentioned, the Trump stuff, it's definitely polarizing two groups of people. And not that it wasn't to this extent before, because, there's always people who are going to dig their heels in on either side, but it's never been this dramatic. It's, even, Obama, Bush, whoever wasn't clogging up news feeds on social media or anything else like in the same way.
Yeah. I was going to say it's very hard for me I'm very conscious about, every generation is like, oh, kids don't get music. Music just happened to be the best when I was growing up. Movies just happen to be everything. So I try not to think that I'm very biased against the fact that maybe something has never been this way before. But I don't even know if you heard about it people will be, it's Friday right now. I don't know. I checked my watch for that. But did you hear like somebody speaking of cult like activity, someone set themselves on fire in front of the steps where the jurors were being chose for Donald Trump's trial?
I haven't even been on social media this week, so no, I heard of nothing. I'm sure that would have come across my feed, and all that come across my feed is funny people get cat stuff, mostly things about being a weirdo. Like that's my feed.
Yeah. But like, I don't know. So to your point of it, I'm usually against it, but like, I mean, what else are you going to say? Someone set themselves on fire.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of like, my aunt was in the hippie era and definitely within that political structure and active in that community. So it's kind of reminiscent of that a little bit. I don't know about setting selves on fire, but there was definitely more. I mean, I don't even know if it's more. I haven't researched any of this, but like it was reminiscent of a little bit of that to me. But I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, people have set themselves on fire for politics before, but still, it just it's crazy, and
that's wild.
And I do. There's an old rule of thumb that I absolutely love. And some of
don't
my
beat your wife with anything thicker than your thumb. Is that it?
Damn it! I forgot about you. Told me that even, and I forgot that.
And Fight Club told me that.
No,
that's not true. Boondock Saints. What am I saying?
Oh, don't compare those.
It wasn't a comparison. It was just
I
haven't seen either in a long time, or read
one in a long time. Oh, but I've got to find a better way to say rule of thumb because I don't have a different phrase for it right now. But that
guiding principle.
Hippies look nice but are mean. Punks look mean but are nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say my aunt's pretty nice, but I get the sentiment. All right, so there's two more recent ones. So another risk factor is increased time online, which I think you kind of touched on with the incel stuff, and then internet addiction. Mm-hmm. I think all of those are fair points. And then this other article that I found from a college. So it was like a study that this college did, Cal State East Bay, which is where my mom got her teaching credential, which is not why I found it, but it just popped up on my Google search, and I was like, oh, hey. Anyway, so they looked at people's perceptions versus what are actual risk factors. And so people would assume that people are stupid if they fall into cults because no one wants to believe that they would be susceptible to a cult. But they found, actually higher education level and intelligence corresponds with more likely to be in a cult due to open-mindedness when presented with new information and ability to understand the concepts of whatever the tenets are that are being told or I don't want to say propagated, but talked about. Another one was people think that people are poor, or poor is not a nice word, but low socioeconomic status. But actually middle and upper class people are more likely to be involved in cults. And that is attributed to not only education level, but also more security in everyday life. And obviously more access to money is more advantageous for the cult. But there's a whole thing with stress. Like there's lots of things to be stressed about, but money is one of the top three across, and so if you're lower on the socioeconomic status, spectrum, whatever it is, you don't have time to engage those kinds of things because you are preoccupied with being able to live. And when you eliminate that factor, there's more time to think about other things like, oh, maybe this idea is a good idea, or, I really want to be in love. I want to find this. And then you come across twin flames, which we will talk about, which is a fascinating one. Anyway. Okay. And then, people are also less likely to have a spiritual upbringing. I mean, with the exception of fundamentalist groups are kind of lumped into cults just because of the extreme nature. There's usually a prophet involved. Mostly we're talking about the fundamentalist Mormon groups, FLDS, but there's probably other ones, but that's the main one you hear about.
Yeah, well, and also I don't always know the names of them, but the snake handlers through the South and shit like that.
Right. But I also think that the people who were involved in, Christianity offshoot cults probably weren't necessarily raised in Christianity unless you are the cult leader, or one or two of them. The rest of them are other people, and these are just correlations basically, not causal things. Right. But it is interesting because they don't want to spend time. They have to spend less time convincing them to ditch their old ideology and get this new one. And then the other one, which synthesizes all of this, is, there are an inordinate amount of young people who are searching for an identity. So that's how it kind of all comes together. So you are higher educated, more open-minded, have more access to money, and less religious, and you're just searching for who you are. And so you're more likely to be like, oh, you're saying this? I really align with this. And then it's just really easy to just get sucked in. So as I said it before on this podcast, you don't know until you actually walk in somebody's shoes, but I would love to say I would never be involved in lots of things, but you never know where you end up. I didn't expect to be in the situations I've been in. So
yeah, well, and too, I think a lot of times that we, to kind of pull back to some of the stuff we've talked about before on the physical and the mental, some of the advice that people will give people that have different mental conditions is so you would never tell somebody who has asthma to walk it off. And yet that's your advice for this person with depression. And I think that comes a lot with, in the same vein, you would never say, well, I would never get mugged.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't say, well, I would never join a cult. It's in both these scenarios, the people are victims. They have been attacked by something that worked on them. And just as you can't say, I would never get mugged, you can do things in your life to, I'm sure, lessen the chances of you getting mugged. And you can live a pretty safe life from being mugged. But you just might have a bad day one day and you get mugged.
Yeah.
And you just might have a bad day one day and mentally you're taken advantage of into joining this nefarious thing.
Right. I feel like,
and I think,
oh no, go ahead. You were in the middle.
I was going to say, and I think one of the things that's kind of maybe really sad about it is I think in a lot of cases, these cult leaders are charlatans.
What does
but
that
I do
mean?
think in charlatan, the reason I use it is because I don't know a better word for it. A charlatan is a faker. Somebody trying to take advantage of somebody else. Somebody pretending to,
like a swindler.
Like a swindler. And so a lot of these people are swindlers. But I think some of them may believe in it as much as their followers do. They may be victims of themselves. Which is sad, but also scary.
I mean, it goes to the thing is it a lie if you believe it? That's how people can pass lie detector tests, which, there's more factors involved there, but that's the gist of that. And I do think a lot of people, I wouldn't say all cults, but I was talking to someone else, and they were saying, oh, all cults start with a good idea. And I was just like, I don't know about that, but I get where you're going with this. Somewhere things got out of hand. But yeah, I do think that I think there's multiple types of cult leaders, right? Like most of them, all of them seem to have this incessant need to be worshipped, which is odd, especially for the ones who are in, biblical realm cult things, like, I don't know. That's just wild to me. How can you believe in the Bible and then your pride just being so that's a deadly sin, don't you know?
Yeah, but also I think, outside of traditional cults, the Bible, I have seen contortions with the Bible that could win gymnastics awards. It is, you can make that book. You can do that with anything. Use that book.
That's true.
Yeah. And that one just happens to have the weight of a lot of history behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's to me that someone uses the Bible to, I see that outside of cults all the time, people using the Bible to push a worldview or push power for themselves.
I mean, you can see it in a courtroom anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's talk about neurodivergence and cults a little bit. So I could only really find stuff about ADHD and then a lot about autism specifically. Yeah. But they also mention, learning disabilities, things that diminish your capacity to maybe understand text or easily susceptible, subject to bullying. There's factors involved there. So, cults tend to schedule your life for you, so you don't have to think. You can go on autopilot. Your routine is right there. What's expected. What's coming. The rules are clear. I was made fun of a lot for being a rule follower. And it's not because I love rules, because they are all very important and they wouldn't be a rule if it wasn't important. It's just like the expectations are there. Like now I know that, if a rule doesn't make sense, then I don't necessarily have to follow it. There's many different circumstances for that. Like I generally follow the law, but if there's no one around and I'm sitting at a left-hand turn arrow and it's red, but the light is green I might take it. I'll roll those dice. Okay. But, it's stuff like that. I don't know. But that I would never have tried to do that 10 years ago. Oh, no way. So there's been a little bit of growth. Not that I'm promoting, breaking the law. It's just, I'm pretty sure no one should just commit outright murder in the way that it's written in the law. And I don't want to live in a society that condones murder for whatever reason you want. Like that is a little scary to me. Anyway, okay, so rules are clear. And the social group generally accepts you. There is, if you've struggled making friends, if you struggle with bullying in your past and being accepted by more than like one or two people in your whole life, love bombing is a thing and they want people to stay. I read a thing where most people are recruited into cults too, we should say. No one's just like, let me just go try this cult over here. Unless they walk into a Scientology building. And even then it's a recruitment because you wouldn't be like, find the alien king at the end. Sure, sign me up. I'm here for this expensive video game.
Yeah. You got to start off with the Thetans.
Yeah. So I forget where I was going with that. They say that, recruiting, they try to recruit people with opposite sex people. So if you're a young male identifying person, they might come at you with a heteronormative woman to recruit you because they assume everyone is hetero.
Right.
And, I think that this was not on here. This is just me thinking about it. I definitely think that they don't believe in anything other than heteronormativity. Any cult. I can't think of one that's like, everything is okay.
I would imagine that there would
I don't know.
have to be, just in the sense that, and to the point that you were talking about earlier with neurodivergence and kids, but it seemed like a lot of the people that you were talking about were that people that have classically been on the outsides of systems.
I'm talking about like, cults, not the people that join them. But I'm just like, I don't know that I don't know of one. Okay, I haven't studied every cult, so I'm not an expert in any sense. But is there a cult that leaves sexuality out of it? Because I feel like even if it's not a, sex cult, it's so high control that it's either like no sex, but then there's gay sex on the side. That is one of the Holy Hell is the documentary. It was a really good one. But for the most part, there's some sort of level of that. So I guess I just disproved my own point. But for the most part, just like the rest of the world, super heteronormative. That's not even the point.
I know. I was gonna say it would very much surprise me if there weren't, because it seems like, trying to find a way to phrase this correctly, that because of the position they held in society, queer kids are in a position to be victimized by this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I would be surprised if none exists.
Yeah. Maybe more on the political side. If I don't know. I don't know all the cults in the world, but the ones that I've come across have very, I guess, distinct rules about sex in general and who you should have sex with.
Right.
Is why I made that comment. Okay. So, so in a situation where people struggle with friendships, they have instant friends. If you've had, if another risk factor is, difficulty intuiting or knowing people's motives. You might just be like, oh, they really just want to be my friend. This is so cool. Oh, they're doing this thing over here. They're stopping, people from clubbing otters to death. That's a great cause. I'm going to join this. These people are so nice to me. And then all of a sudden it's something else. That's a fake thing I just made up. I don't know if that exists as a cult or not, but or as a drawing in tactic. But that would, with a person with autism or, any neuro-D thing, if you happen to hit on one of their special interests or circumscribed interests, that's one of your standing points, like that might draw that person in, and then, the literalness of everything anyway. As I kind of already said, cults may appear as positive places with community, especially when away from the nuclear family home. So this would be like maybe low support needs people fleeing the nest, going to college, moving somewhere else, doing somewhere where they don't have their support system that they had previously.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we should be very careful about is sometimes, not all, but sometimes some neurotypical folks might take this as a negative or a reason to be scared of or further push away neurodivergent people, specifically autistic people. I guess the point I would bring up is that I think a lot of what we're talking about in these cases is the reason that people with neurodivergence maybe are higher risk for people with cults, maybe partially because of the way their brain works, but also I think just as equally, if not more so, the way that they've been treated throughout their lives. And that a lot of ways, it seems to me, not being a specialist in any way, but it seems to me that what the cult can really do when you zoom out and with broad brushstrokes is fill a hole that was left by society in some way. And so the thing I want to be really clear about is if you're listening to this thinking that you should be in some way more scared or more distant, or treat autistic or people, or autistic people or neurodivergent people in general differently because of this fear, the real answer is that you should be including them more. You should be making a better effort to make sure, especially, I would say everybody, but especially kids, is if these cults are offering up love that they weren't given, then let's make sure that they're given that love.
And by love, you mean like inclusion.
Yeah.
Which you
and also just not ostracizing,
Yeah.
If
I didn't think that people would be afraid more by that at all. So that's a good point. I just took this as like, these are additional risk factors, or like why things that are typical of, diagnoses, specifically autism, right? Like difficulty with social interaction. Well, haven't been able to make friends my whole life, and now here's some friends. Finally, I have a place to land, which I wouldn't even think that someone would be afraid of someone more because they are likely to fall into that. It's more of just, but I mean, not to say, I just didn't think about it. So that was a good point.
Yeah. Well, and I know it's like, that, like the reason it gets to me, or the reason that it comes up on my radar so heavily, is that I think back to Sandy Hook. I know if I remember correctly, Sandy Hook was committed by somebody who had autism, and that became a narrative so quick. And I just think that kind of what I don't want to see with this discussion, not saying that we were doing it, but I have seen that discussion talk about like, it very quickly comes to people making up scenarios with no reference whatsoever of like, oh, well, this kid, like clearly he had autism, so he didn't understand everybody's emotions, so he was like this emotionless killer. And it's like, that's not what autism is.
That's like saying, what, it's a known fact that every serial killer loves ice cream, so therefore if you love ice cream, you are a serial killer. No, not the same. You could draw that irrational conclusion, but yeah. Okay.
No, and that's a good point. But yeah, that's just something I try to be mindful of.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so another risk factor is propensity to believe that what they're being told and assume that people say exactly what they mean. So, everything at face value, which that is something that is a thing for me.
I am actively trying to do that.
Like I miss things all the time, and I can give an example in terms of shows. I already brought up Baby Reindeer, which I get because they make it very obvious the point that they're trying to make. I can tell when something is really big, but I don't understand why. Like it goes over my head. So I watched that show, The Curse, on Showtime. I don't know if it's Showtime, but it's on Paramount Plus.
Okay. I haven't seen it.
Okay. I was like, this is I know that they're talking about exploiting cultures. It's a fake thing about a fake HGTV show, probably not even HGTV, but about trying to go in and help, quote unquote, a community, and really just exploiting the shit out of them and all these things. A lot of stuff went over my head, and I was really confused, especially at the last episode. But I think it's a really important show, and I think that people need to watch it, and I think that people won't. But I think that they left a lot to be interpreted, which I really struggle with. But I knew enough to know like this is big and this is powerful and meaningful. I just don't fully understand all of the points. But in a cult situation, those things are kind of laid out there for you. And they believe like, okay, if this person is saying, I want to help all these people and and this is how we do it, you get so aligned with the values behind it that you're being told that that's why this is happening, then all of the other stuff, and this is not just for people with autism, this is, or neuro-D, this is for everybody, you get that buy-in on the value level, you can justify a lot of bad behavior. And that's just, deviance and social control. I mean, I took a class on it. I don't expect everyone else to. To me, it's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then the last point here. So focused or fixed interests, aka circumcised interests, circumscribed. So that could be exploited by a cult. So let's say that a person's special interest is, IT stuff. Like you could like rise to the top real quick and be able to do all these like, computery things. Never get paid or get paid very little, which is kind of a thing with cults. I forget which cult it was, but they had like a sandwich shop, and this was the 70s. Everybody worked basically for free. That's a theme, but it could especially be, I don't know. Or like, I mean, if that person's special interest becomes like the cult material, like they could propagate a lot and be able to speak with sounding like they have a lot of knowledge and expertise and come off very professional, I would say. There are a lot of people that I think are on the spectrum that are, well-spoken speakers, and it can be very convincing. When you talk to a person about their circumscribed interest, they are speaking from a place of authority of some kind, and that can be very powerful.
Yeah. And I think too, just again, to maybe open up the world's view, or the 12 people who's listened to us view of autism and the many different ways it can look. But like, I call back to our episodes on careers. And one of them where somebody with autism might excel, a specific type, was sales, because they can have that specified knowledge and that kind of drive
and they can convince you. It can come off very convincing and very like, there's an answer for everything. So those are ways those are additional risk factors, if you will, in the neuro-D community, to being susceptible to cults. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to something else? Culty? I wanted to bring up, we've mentioned some of the classics. This is in no way
not a greatest hits album.
No, but like, I mean, as with everything else, everyone has heard of Manson, the family. Everyone has heard of, Jonestown. Everyone has heard of a lot of them, Heaven's Gate, whatever. I just wanted to drop a few that, I've learned about in the last year that are really interesting to me for many reasons. So one of them is the twin flames thing. I don't know if you've heard or seen it. Okay, so this one...
I have not.
Okay, this one is super interesting because this one is basically mind control, life control via Zoom. This developed relatively, probably within the last 10 years, but they've really used social media and Zoom calls to propagate their stuff. It has some elements of Scientology with the, you have to pay to... take these courses, and then they can certify you as like a life coach, but then it's all within this bubble, and there's, it's coming from this couple at the top. But like some of the to me, there might be others, but this is the first big one that uses, video platforms, video calls and conferencing almost exclusively for its members. So this means, the reach is bigger than whatever's in your backyard. This is, you don't have to find a compound, although I hear that they are trying to make the couple leader's house property something, I don't know, like a compound kind of thing. But that's one interesting feature of this cult. Another is they are very into masculinity and femininity. They are not a religious cult, but the whole thing with the twin flames is like, you have this one perfect soulmate for you out there somewhere, and everyone that's joining this cult is trying to learn how they can find that person. So within that, at first it was, just stalk whoever you think you're in love with and just make them love you. And if you're not doing it, then you don't, like you're not good enough, basically. Like you can call them 100 times in a day. Like that's fine. Like do whatever you need to do to get this person to love you. And then it turned into, we'll find it for you. So that was kind of like their guarantee. And then most of their, population was, female. And so they would, eventually like, you know what, your twin flame is within our group. And, and so at first it started with, your twin flame is actually female. And, most people in there would not have identified as lesbian. But they would be in same-sex relationships, convinced because these two people told them, this is your twin flame, this is your true love. And then they were like, you know what, one of you has masculine energy and you need to transition to male. And so people are transitioning to males, male identities, genitalia too, I believe. And they're basically forcing them. The people obviously would not say that they were being forced, like when they're in the thick of it. I just,
people in cults usually don't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to my knowledge, this is the first cult that is forcing people to change gender. Like that's such a big fucking thing. Like it's just so wild. And there are 2 documentaries out about it. The Netflix one is the one that most people talk about and have seen, but I would say that the one on Amazon Prime is way better. It's called Desperately Seeking Soulmate. And the reason I think it's better is because you get more of a bird's eye view from people who were closer to them, the interviewees, and you get footage from inside their actual house. Anyway, it's worth checking out. It's fascinating. I mean, love is the thing. People want to be in love, I guess. And well, and I mean, it is, I don't want to downplay that it is something that a majority of people look for. There are exceptions, and those exceptions are wonderful. Yes, thank you.
But yeah, it is, and in no small way does society push that on people, right? Or at least that idea. And I think that it is. I think there's I think there's some undertones of it that kind of preclude you finding happiness within yourself, which is really a place you should be, regardless of whether or not you are pursuing something romantic with somebody else or not.
Yeah. I mean, that one is fascinating to me just because, it's kind of like the new wave, I would say. And it's a little scarier because the reach is farther, with being able to be so successful, forcing people to transition who are halfway across the world. I mean, that's no small thing. There's no physical dependence there. They obviously have to work, and they're not dependent financially on this group unless they are employed by anyway, that's a part of it, yes, but other parts of it, no. Anyway, do you, I mean, I have a whole list of things that I could talk about, but is there one that, fascinates you?
Oh, yes, I can. Hold on. Yeah, well, and two, this is something I touched upon earlier, but there's this, and I don't know if they classify as a cult right now because they don't have a particular leader, and because but it's certainly cult adjacent, is the incel community. But also I think kind of cousins with that is the so-called manosphere. And the manosphere, for people who don't know, is this kind of male empowered area on the internet. And I feel like I should say that this, when male empowerment in this sense is a push towards more traditional gender roles, the patriarchy, men being in a position of power. It's where you'll hear stuff like, women hold the key to sex, men hold the key to relationships. Just a bunch of old, really played out dogma has, no room for people outside of the gender binary. And certainly isn't thinking of, but just reinforces really classic, really bad roles, for men and women. And, but it's, young men with autism tend to be more susceptible. Plenty of people without autism, plenty of young men without autism also susceptible. But they seem to have a little bit of a higher susceptibility to it. And it is for a lot of the things that, we talked about earlier, is you do find, these places, these people, these young men that have, for in some ways are, different enough, either internally or, viewed that way from the outside, where just they're not going to find a way to involve themselves in what would otherwise be a healthy sexual timeline. And so you're going to get things like lack of touch, but you're also going to get things like insulating yourself and things like that. And just as that kind of, that builds a way into kind of the incel community, it also creates this giant hole, which is exactly what guys like Andrew Tate, that are kind of, I think he's one of the bigger names in the kind of maniverse sphere right now, but people that come in and offer the very real answers to these questions of like, or at least offer or sell this as a real answer to these questions of like, oh, hey, you're not getting any, you're not, you're not rich, you're not this and that. I'm all these things. I have all these. Come look how I did it. It's by acting like a man. And maybe if you stop being such a pussy, you'll get it too. And
I hate this.
I apologize.
I know you do too. But you need to say it.
But that's the kind of mentality that they're pushing, that it's, the world has gone awry and men can't be men anymore. And, and it is a bad answer to the emotions that you don't understand at that age, especially when you're not on a healthy track, for whatever reason. It's a bad answer, but it is an answer. And, human beings in general, we're an answer seeking, species. And that's a beautiful thing about us, except for sometimes we have a propensity to accept the wrong answer. And so again, that does not excuse the behavior of anybody who is autistic and starts following ideologies, like the manosphere. But it also, they are victims and aggressors. And we have to realize that there are people at the top, like Andrew Tate, that are just aggressors, that are just taking advantage of these young boys, to push his own power and his own weird, warped sense of what makes him valuable as a human being. Mm-hmm. And while they don't technically, like I say, they're not technically cults, you're going to see, I'm at least seeing a large overlap, between them, particularly for young men, and particularly for, how the experience of being different and a young man can be, and autism, neurodiversity, all of those things are going to push those differences. Especially, I mean, I hope that this is something that improves with time. I mean, I hope my wish would be improved overnight, but yeah, so that's kind of where I see a lot of that behavior.
Yeah. Just a couple others that I wanted to mention that kind of like maybe go under the radar or whatever. I mean, one that was triggering in a good way for me. It helped me heal some of like my religious hurts or whatever. So there's this documentary called Shiny Happy People, and it's about the Duggar family, which are the 19 kids and counting people. There's been not scandal, but just like uncovering, sibling, child sexual stuff, and full on adult to child abuse, which is indoctrinated in their belief system, which is the Institute of Basic Life Principles. I mean, it was fascinating for me. If you have a history of being in religious, I don't know. It's just they were all, that family was always very interesting to me, because I'm just like, how does people just have so many children, and why is this woman so doe-like in her presentation and her soft spokenness, and all of the kids seemed very well behaved, and I just didn't understand it because I knew kids and kids didn't act like that. So this kind of explains why all that was happening, other than the fact that, kids are raising kids in that scenario, Mom is nursing babies and passing them off to whoever's turn it is to have a baby to watch so she can have another one, stuff like that. Like, that's all kind of messed up. In a scenario where, those two people didn't have to have 19 children. No one asked them to do that. But their ideology did tell them they had to do that, which their leader, one of the things for me, anyone that I look up to, I'm like, does your behavior match what you're saying? Okay. So like a lot of these things, like they'll tell you need to do X, Y, or Z, but like, the leader of this cult is a single male, never married, never had kids. He was just priming and plucking all the girls and putting them there, have all these compounds and shit, and he was just having a heyday of sex with all of these underage girls. I mean, that's how a lot of it turns out, unfortunately.
Well, and I think that's a lot of the kind of the Messiah thing of the follow what I say, not what I do.
Guess what? The Jesus Messiah didn't have sex with people, no matter what culture in, everyone. Unless you're in the Children of God. And that one, they literally say, Jesus wants to fuck you. Like, that is just, that's so wild. That is so anti how I was raised and how the Bible literally reads, that I just don't understand how they got there, but they did. And that's one you could check out too. There's a few documentaries about that. I mean, it's disturbing as hell. It is one of the harder ones, just the sexual, a lot of cults and other things sexualize women and children, but this is like a whole other level of that. Anyway, and then I just want to say, Jehovah's Witnesses, it's a lot of cult-like behavior. It is now officially listed as a cult as far as the U.S. is concerned. They obviously don't say that they are a cult, but there are certain factors that put them in that category. They are much higher control, have much more say over participants' day-to-day lives, and much more checking in and consequences if you don't. You can be exiled, become an apostate. You can't, the outside is bad. This is something that never made sense to me, because in the Bible it says that there's space for 144,000 people in heaven or whatever, and the theology in mainstream Christianity is that was just like a figurative something. But it's very literal for this group. And I'm just like, well, then why are they recruiting people? Why are they posting up at the end of the Brea tracks and ruining my fucking Saturday walk? Which I
thought you were going to say ruining my fucking chances bad enough.
No.
There's only 144,000.
But to me, like in my literal mind, I'm just like, if this is what you believe, why are you recruiting? This makes no sense to me. You're probably not getting in there, but I guess the idea is that they'll be resurrected and just chill here on earth. And even though they're not in heaven, like they'll still be like holy or something. I don't know. That's not why they're a cult. That's just something that's never made sense to me. Yeah. And then
there's an old joke that is a group of pastors are on a what do you call it, on a mission to a foreign country, and they come across the native peoples and they go up to them and it's like, hey, we're here to tell you about God and Jesus Christ, and if you don't believe in him, then you're not going to go to heaven. You'll go to hell, this horrible place, and burn forever. And the native guy is like, you mean your God would have sent us to hell for not even knowing that he existed? And the guy goes, well, no, but now that you know, you have to believe in God or you go to hell. And the native guy goes, why the hell did you tell us?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot with that. Yeah. So, but okay. So I know we're running kind of long. But there are just some warning signs. If you're thinking that you are in a cult, here's some things you can ponder. Okay. Is there absolute authoritarian? Oh my God. Is there absolute authoritarianism without accountability? Is there zero tolerance for criticism or questions? Is there a lack of meaningful financial disclosure regarding the budget? Unreasonable fears about the outside world that often involved evil conspiracies and persecutions? Is there a belief that former followers are always wrong for leaving and there is never a legitimate reason for anyone else to leave? Are people being abused? Yourself included. Are records, books, articles, or programs in existence that document the abuses of the leader or group? So this, I guess, would be outside things like, if there's some that are, still around. Can't think of any off the top of my head because I didn't write them in here. But anyway, are the followers feeling like they're never good enough? Is there a belief that the leader is right at all times? And is there a belief that the leader is the exclusive means of knowing the truth or giving validation? These are things you can ask yourself if you believe that you're in a cult. Okay, so going back to that other point, though, books, articles, whatever. So, okay, there are active members of NXIVM still, supporters of Keith Raniere, who is now in jail for the next 120 years.
Spoilers.
Hey, if you didn't know that by now, you didn't want to know. But literally the Vow seasons 1 and 2 exist. I'm sure there's other stuff, articles, writing. So like if those kinds of things exist about your group, because I mean, that's just that's what that means, I guess. Are there things singling it out?
And I'll point this out for the record. I think that that list you gave is a very good list. And who knows if there's a few things on there that match up. Maybe what you're part of right now doesn't rise to the level of cult, but also it may rise to the level of you taking some concern, maybe watching your back, and maybe finding something that suits you a little bit better without some of that shady shit involved.
Yeah. Like just know that you can call it whatever you want. But your relationship with your gut instinct is important. And the tells that that it's onto something is that it doesn't try to hurt other people. It's just like when you know the right answer, but you have a million reasons why you don't listen. The more disenfranchised and disconnected you become from that, the easier it is to doubt yourself in general. So I would guess you could say that, the easier it would be to be persuaded to be in a cult, something like that. You're more susceptible, possibly, that thing. I was on a personal journey of instead of engaging all of the doubt, I spent, so long doing all of that, going with, what, this is what I actually think. This was like my gut reaction. And I'm sure there's a
Mhm.
million things that you could say that, this wouldn't work for. But when it comes to the big stuff, I think you know,
Right.
for the most part, I can't speak for, I mean, some horrendously evil deeds were done. Maybe those people were following a different type of thing that they interpret as God. I don't really know how all of that works. The mind is very mysterious.
Yeah.
It's not, well documented how that literally happens within the brain. But if it's,
Well, and
oh, no, go ahead. I didn't want
I
to
was gonna
disqualify everything I said. I just, I know what's right and what's not. I used to be very easily convinced to do something different, not necessarily believe something different, thankfully. But I spent a lot of time doing things that I knew weren't right for me, but trying to please everyone else around me. And when I stopped doing that, I found peace, and I am not hurting anyone. I feel like I'm a better person for it. And I just think that is something that if you can connect with your intuition, your gut, it's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think that was just adding on to that I think the gut is a great place. If something feels wrong, then take the next step and sit and think on it, because it's not impossible that your gut's wrong about something, but it's certainly worth checking out.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would argue that if your gut feels wrong about something and you don't want to investigate it with your mind, that's probably more of a reason to start investigating it with your mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't have all the answers here, but I think
but we do have that one.
We do have that one. I do think though that my relationship with my intuition is an indicator that I am less likely at this point in my life to be involved as a participant in a cult, just because I am purposefully listening to that now on things that are much of a lot less consequence, because, cults can take over very quickly, and they apply or, appeal to your sensibilities about the world and what you believe, which is why they're so powerful, I think. But I think that that's a risk factor in the opposite direction. It's an anti-risk factor for me now, but this is new within the last year as a development. But still, you never say never. I don't know. All right. Well, if you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, follow wherever you're listening to us. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and TikTok at InnerMoxiePod. You can email us at myinnermoxiepod@gmail.com. If you want to follow me on social media, I am at Zanism, Zannism. I am a religion and a disease and a cult leader for today only.
By the way, this literally just occurred to me earlier today. It's Zanism, like the ism of like Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
Literally until now, for the however long we've been doing this show, I thought you were saying Zanny Zim, and I thought it was just like a funny last name.
No, Zanism. Someone I used to work with.
No, it makes total sense now.
Someone I used to work with nicknamed me that when I was like 19 years old, and it's just stuck. And it's just funny that it could be a religion or a disease. Both end in isms.
Yeah, both a religion and a disease, not or.
Not or. Oh yeah, it could be either or and. I'm both.
If you want to hear more of my ramblings, you can go listen to me over on the Band Media podcast. Also, you can find me on social media, but where I am most active is over on TikTok at Band Ronnie.
Yay. And until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.
Nice.
Bye.
Later.